frontier rancher found an injured Apache woman by the riverbank, and his life changed forever. John Carter had been awake since before sunrise. The cool morning air of the Arizona frontier bit gently at his cheeks as he saddled his old, sturdy horse Rusty. His ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that only existed far from towns and roads, where the wind whispered through the tall grass and the only sounds were the low calls of birds and the distant rush of the river. John had grown used to this solitude over the years. After his parents had passed, he had inherited the ranch and decided to make a life on his own, away from the noise and chaos of the small towns nearby. He liked it that way, peaceful, predictable, and under his control. That morning, John was making his usual rounds along the riverbank, checking the water supply for his cattle and making sure no wolves or coyotes had come too close to the herd. He had ridden this path many times, but something about the early light made the world seem different, sharper, and more alive. He adjusted the worn leather strap of his saddle, scanning the horizon where the golden sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the cottonwood trees. Then he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. At first, he thought it was a piece of clothing caught on a branch, fluttering in the wind. But as he squinted, he realized it was a person, a woman, lying very still near the water's edge, her dark hair tangled and matted, her clothes were torn, and a faint line of red ran down her arm. She was breathing, but barely, and she didn't move as the wind blew across the river. John felt his heart tighten. He had never seen anyone in such a state, and instinctively he knew she needed help. Fast. Cautiously, he guided Rusty closer, careful not to startle her. "Hey," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and even. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." His words seemed small against the vastness of the land, but the woman stirred slightly, her eyes opening just enough to glimmer in the sunlight. Fear and pain were clear in her gaze. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. John dismounted slowly, leaving the reins over Rusty's neck. He knelt beside her, checking her arm. The cut was deep, and the blood was already starting to dry. He tore a piece of cloth from his own shirt, pressing it gently against the wound to slow the bleeding. The woman flinched at first, but then allowed him to continue, trusting him enough to stop struggling. As he worked, John noticed something else, the faint footprints leading away from her. They were small, like hers, and there were 2 sets of them. He realized she wasn't alone. Carefully, he looked into the bushes nearby. At first, he saw nothing, just the thick brush and shadows. Then, a rustle caught his attention. 2 other women emerged slowly, moving with caution. Their eyes were wide, alert, and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. They were younger, perhaps sisters or cousins, and though they looked weak and frightened, it was clear they had survived something terrible together. Instead, he spoke in a calm, measured tone. "It's all right. I won't hurt you. Come closer if you can." The 2 younger women hesitated, then took tentative steps forward, staying close to the bushes at first. John kept his distance, kneeling beside the injured woman, showing that he meant no harm. After a few tense moments, they edged closer, their movements slow and careful, like they were testing whether the stranger could be trusted. The woman with the cut looked up at John again. Her eyes were dark and filled with pain, but there was also something else, a flicker of relief, the recognition that maybe, just maybe, she was safe. John nodded reassuringly, giving her a small smile. "I'll get you somewhere safe. You don't have to be afraid." He gently helped her onto Rusty's back, supporting her as she tried to sit upright. She clung to him instinctively, her strength almost gone. The other 2 women followed at a distance, still wary. John knew he couldn't carry all 3 at once, and that made him tense. But there was no time to worry about how to solve every problem at once. the priority was the injured woman. He guided Rusty slowly along the riverbank, the morning light reflecting off the water in shimmering patterns. The soft clop of the horse's hooves on the sandy ground and the gentle flow of the river filled the air. As he rode, John thought about what might have happened to them. Their clothing was torn and they were far from any village. Bandits? A skirmish with another group? It was impossible to know for sure, but one thing was certain. They had been through something terrible. He felt a protective urge he hadn't felt in years. Usually he kept to himself, focused on his ranch and animals. But these women needed him, and for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of purpose beyond his daily routines. By the time he reached his cabin, the women had begun to relax slightly. John guided Rusty into the small stable and helped the injured woman down gently. He laid her on a clean blanket and carefully unwrapped the cloth he had tied around her arm. The cut needed proper treatment, so John cleaned it with water from a nearby jug and dressed it as best as he could with bandages he had kept for emergencies. The women watched silently, their trust growing slowly with each careful movement he made. After tending to the wound, John offered them water and some dry bread. The injured woman took it with trembling hands, while the others stood quietly nearby, eyeing the cabin with curiosity and caution. John understood. This was all new to them. They didn't know him, and in the wilderness, trust was earned slowly. He spoke softly, explaining that they were safe here, at least for now. The morning turned to midday, and John realized that their arrival had changed something in him. His routine, once predictable and solitary, now included these three strangers. He didn't know how long they would stay or what challenges lay ahead, but he felt ready to face them. For years he had lived for the land, for the cattle, and for the quiet. Now he realized life could hold something more: compassion, connection, and the unexpected twists of fate that brought strangers together in the most unlikely ways. As the sun climbed higher, the women began to move a little more freely, helped by the presence of someone who truly wanted to help. John watched them, feeling a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. That day, by the riverbank, his life began to change, not in dramatic ways, but in quiet, steady moments of trust, courage, and humanity. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Finding these women was not just an act of chance. It was the beginning of a journey that would transform all of their lives forever. Once the injured woman had rested a little, John realized that he could not ignore the other two women any longer. They had stayed close to the doorway of the cabin, eyes wide and cautious, their hands tightly clutched together. He could see the fear in their movements, not just from being hurt or hungry, but from years of having to survive in a harsh world where strangers often brought danger rather than help. John took a slow, deep breath. He knew he had to earn their trust, one small step at a time. "Come inside," he said gently, keeping his voice calm. "You won't be hurt here." The two younger women glanced at each other and hesitated. Their eyes flicked toward the woods, as if ready to flee, but John waited patiently. He did not force them. Slowly they shuffled forward, one step at a time, until they were inside the cabin. The sunlight streaming through the small windows fell on their faces, revealing the exhaustion and fear etched into their features. John offered them water in simple clay cups. They drank cautiously, not sure if he was truly kind. Then he brought out some bread and dried fruit he had saved for himself, placing it on the table. "Eat," he said simply. "You need it." Hunger was stronger than fear, and after a few moments of hesitation, the women began to nibble quietly. John noticed how careful they were with every movement, how every glance seemed to measure him, testing if he could be trusted. He understood. Out here, trust was earned through actions, not words. He could not rush them, but he could show them through his deeds that he was there to help. Over the next few hours, John worked quietly around the cabin, chopping firewood, cleaning the small space, and making sure the injured woman was comfortable. The women observed him silently, gradually lowering their guard. They spoke very little, only nodding or shaking their heads in response to his questions. Yet even this small acknowledgement was progress. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, John decided they needed a fire for warmth. The desert nights were cold, and he could see the shivering in the women's shoulders. He gathered dry wood and kindling and soon had a small fire crackling in the hearth. The warmth seemed to soothe them, and for a few moments there was silence in the cabin that was comfortable rather than tense. John sat near the fire, leaning against the wall, giving them space to adjust while keeping a watchful eye. Finally, the injured woman spoke, her voice low and hoarse. "Thank you," she whispered. Her words were soft, almost like a breeze, but John could hear the gratitude in them. He nodded, offering a small smile. "It's okay. You're safe now." The other two women looked at each other, and then one stepped closer, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "Why, help us?" she asked, her words broken but clear enough to understand. John shrugged gently. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should be hurt or left alone." The woman's eyes widened slightly. She had probably never heard someone speak with such honesty and care before. Slowly, she inched closer to the fire, letting its warmth ease some of the tension in her body. The third woman followed her example, sitting quietly on a blanket near the corner. As night fell, the cabin became a quiet sanctuary. John offered the women blankets to keep them warm. He could see the physical pain in the injured woman and the emotional exhaustion in the others. Their journey to this point must have been terrifying, and John felt a deep respect for their resilience. He had always considered himself strong, but the strength it took to survive on the frontier alone, to escape danger and protect one another, was something entirely different. Over the next few days, John worked carefully to help them regain some energy and confidence. He treated the injured woman's wound each day, cleaning it and changing the bandages first. The wound slowly healed, but the pain left a lingering fear that made her cautious. He spoke to her gently, explaining every step he took so she would not be frightened. "This will hurt a little," he would say, "but it will make you stronger." Each time she would nod and take a deep breath, trusting him more with every treatment. The two younger women began to help in small ways. One gathered firewood from the yard, the other fetched water from the river. At first they were clumsy, unsure of their movements, but John encouraged them patiently. "You're doing fine," he said. "Take your time. There's no rush." Gradually they began to relax, laughing quietly when they dropped something or spilled a little water. It was the first time John had heard their voices fully, and it was a sound he found comforting. During these quiet moments, John started to learn more about them. They spoke in broken English, and sometimes John had to use gestures to understand. He learned that the women were part of an Apache family, traveling together for safety after an attack on their village. The story was heartbreaking, but it also explained their caution, their fear, and the close bond they shared. John felt a mixture of sadness and admiration. These women had endured more hardship than most people could imagine, yet here they were, alive and determined to keep going. As the days passed, the women's trust in John grew. They began to speak more openly, asking questions about life on the ranch, the animals, and the land. John answered with patience, showing them how he cared for his cattle, how he tended to crops, and how he repaired fences. The women watched closely, learning quickly. For the first time in months, they felt some sense of normalcy. a small space where they could rest and rebuild strength before continuing their journey. John also began to notice something changing within himself. His life had always been quiet, almost lonely, but now it was filled with purpose beyond the routine of ranching. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment in helping these women, in seeing them regain confidence and safety. He realized that life's meaning was not just about survival or solitude, but about connection and compassion, about being there for others when they needed help the most. Evenings became a special time. After the chores were done, they would sit by the fire, talking softly, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. John learned about their culture, their traditions, and the ways they survived in the harsh wilderness. In return, he shared his knowledge of ranching and frontier life. Though their lives had been different, the women and John found common ground in the simple desire for safety, respect, and trust. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, John looked at the three women sitting near the fire. The injured woman was smiling slightly for the first time since he had found her. The two younger women were laughing quietly at something John had said. In that moment he understood that the small acts of kindness, patience, and care he had shown had made a profound difference. He had given them not just safety, but hope, something even more precious than food or shelter. By the end of the first week, the women were stronger and more comfortable. The injured woman could walk short distances without help, and the others moved with confidence around the cabin and yard. John knew their journey was far from over, but he also knew that they had found a temporary home and someone they could trust. For him, it was the start of a transformation. He had come to the frontier seeking solitude, but now his life was intertwined with theirs in a way that would shape the future in ways he could not yet imagine. The days on the ranch passed quietly but meaningfully. John, who had always been used to silence, now found joy in the small sounds of life, the laughter of the women, the soft conversations around the fire, and even the gentle footsteps on the wooden floor. The cabin, once just a place to live and work, had become a space of healing, learning, and connection. For all of them, it was a new beginning, fragile, uncertain, but filled with hope and promise. Over the following days, a slow change took place in the cabin. The women, once cautious and quiet, began to feel safer. The injured woman, whose name was Island, had regained much of her strength, and the two younger women, Taya and Naya, moved more confidently around the yard, helping with small chores. They were still wary, their eyes alert for danger, but the fear that had defined their journey began to fade, replaced by cautious curiosity. One morning, as John prepared breakfast, Island spoke softly, almost as if testing the words on her tongue. "John, why help us?" she asked again. It was not a question of surprise this time, but of curiosity. She wanted to understand the man who had rescued them without hesitation, who had given them food, water, and shelter, and who had treated their injuries with care. John smiled gently. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "No one deserves to be left alone when they are hurt. No one deserves to be afraid." Island nodded, a small spark of understanding in her dark eyes. She looked at Taya and Naya, who were busy gathering kindling for the fire, and then back at John. It was clear she had never met someone so calm, so willing to help without expecting anything in return. That afternoon, after chores were done, Island began to speak about their journey. Her words were slow at first, hesitant, as if testing the safety of the cabin. She told John that they were members of an Apache family, traveling through the harsh land to reach a safer area after their village had been attacked. Bandits had stolen supplies and threatened lives, forcing them to flee with only what they could carry. Her voice shook as she spoke, not just from fear, but from the memories of what they had endured. John listened in silence, letting her speak without interruption. He could see the strength it took for her to recount these events, and he felt a deep respect for her courage. Taya and Naya, who had been helping nearby, paused to listen, their expressions serious. For the first time, they felt that someone truly understood their pain, someone who could be trusted to hold their story safely. As the days passed, the women shared more about their lives before the attack. They spoke of their village, the close community they had known, and the traditions they had cherished. John had never known such a tight-knit way of life, and he listened with fascination. He learned about the ceremonies, the songs, and the stories that had been passed down for generations. The women spoke with pride about their heritage, and John began to feel a connection to a world very different from his own. At the same time, John shared his life with them. He told them about the ranch, how he had inherited it from his parents, and how he managed the cattle and crops alone. He explained the routines of frontier life, the chores, the risks, and the small joys of living close to the land. Island, Taya, and Naya listened carefully, asking questions and learning quickly. Though their cultures were different, they discovered a shared respect for hard work, for the land, and for the courage it took to survive in a sometimes harsh world. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, John and the women sat around the fire. The warmth of the flames reflected in their eyes, and for the first time, laughter broke the quiet. Taya had spilled a little water while filling a jug, and Naya had teased her gently about it. Even Island smiled, the shadows of fear in her eyes slowly disappearing. John realized that these small moments of joy shared in simple ways were just as important as food or shelter. They were rebuilding a sense of normalcy piece by piece. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch began to feel almost like a routine again, but one that included the women. They helped with chores, tending to the small garden John had planted, feeding the chickens, and learning to mend fences. John taught them how to care for the animals, explaining which plants were safe to eat and how to watch for signs of danger in the wilderness. In return, they taught him about the plants and herbs they used for healing, sharing knowledge passed down in their families. John found himself amazed at how much he could learn from them, and they began to see him not just as a helper, but as a teacher and friend. One day, John noticed Aylin walking along the riverbank, looking thoughtful. He joined her, and she spoke about her hopes for the future. "I want to see my family again," she said quietly. "I want to be safe, but also to live." John nodded, understanding her desire. "We'll make sure you can," he said. "And until that day comes, you'll be safe here. You have a place with us now." Island's eyes softened, and for the first time, John felt that he was truly part of something larger than himself, a bond that went beyond survival or fear. During these moments, John realized that his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. He had lived for years alone, focused on work and routine, but now he had a reason to look beyond himself. He cared for these women not just because it was the right thing to do, but because he genuinely wanted to see them thrive. He began to see the ranch not just as land and buildings, but as a home filled with possibility and connection. The women, too, began to adjust to their new life. They started to share small details about their personalities and preferences, and John learned to recognize their moods and needs. Island enjoyed quiet mornings by the river, while Taya liked working with the animals, and Naya loved gathering herbs and exploring the plants around the cabin. Each had their own strengths, and John found that together they created a sense of balance and harmony. One day a storm approached, dark clouds rolling across the sky with sudden speed. John and the women worked quickly to secure the animals and the cabin, tying down equipment and moving supplies inside. They worked side by side, communicating with gestures and simple words, forming a rhythm that made the work easier. When the storm hit, they huddled inside the cabin, listening to the rain pounding against the roof. Aylin, Taya, and Naya held hands quietly, a silent show of unity and trust. John realized that these women, once strangers, had become his family in a way he had never expected. By the end of the week, the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean. The women laughed as they stepped outside, feeling the wet grass beneath their feet and the warm sun breaking through the clouds. John watched them, feeling a sense of pride and joy. These moments of laughter and relief were victories in themselves, proof that trust, care, and patience could overcome fear and hardship. As the sun set on another day, John sat on the porch of his cabin looking at the women as they prepared a small meal together. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were still dangers in the wilderness, and the women's family was still far away. But for the first time, he felt that they could face the future together, stronger than they had ever been alone. In their stories, their laughter, and their growing bond, John saw a new purpose for his life, one filled with compassion, connection, and hope. That night, as the fire burned low, Island whispered a simple word that made John pause. "Thank you." It was more than gratitude. It was a recognition of trust, safety, and care. John smiled softly, knowing that while he had saved them from immediate danger, they had saved him too, from loneliness, from isolation, and from a life without deep human connection. Together they had begun to build something new, not just survival, but life, full of possibility and hope. Life on the ranch was slowly settling into a rhythm, but John knew it would never be completely easy. The land could be harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Rainstorms could turn the dirt paths into sticky mud, and long dry spells could leave the cattle hungry. Wild animals prowled the edges of the property, and bandits or other travelers sometimes brought trouble. John had always faced these challenges alone, but now, with Island, Taya, and Naya living with him, every day became a test of cooperation, patience, and courage. The morning sun rose over the mountains, spilling light across the ranch. John was already up, checking the fences and making sure the water troughs were full. The women had woken early as well, ready to help with the chores. Aylin walked toward the barn with a bucket in her hand, carefully checking on the cows. Taya carried a bundle of hay, moving steadily, while Naya followed with a small basket of eggs they had collected from the chicken coop. The quiet hum of their movements filled the air, a sign that the women were settling into frontier life. Despite their growing comfort, challenges soon arrived. One morning, John discovered that a part of the fence surrounding the cattle had been damaged, likely by a fallen branch during a recent windstorm. Some of the cows had wandered too close to the river, grazing dangerously near the edge. John's heart raced. "Island! Taya! Naya! Help me round them up," he called. The women reacted immediately, rushing to his side with determination. The work was physically demanding. The cows were large and strong, and getting them back into the pen required patience, careful movement, and teamwork. Island moved quickly to block one cow that had wandered far, while Taya guided another toward the gate. Naya stood by the fence, ready to close it once the animals were inside. John shouted instructions, but he also noticed how naturally the women had begun to understand the animals' behavior. They were learning fast, and he felt pride in their progress. After the cows were safely penned, John noticed how tired everyone was. He suggested they take a short break by the riverbank. They sat on smooth stones, watching the water ripple past. "You're doing really well," John said. "I've lived on this land my whole life, and even I can't always manage everything alone. Having all of you here makes a difference." Island smiled faintly, while Taya and Naya exchanged glances. It was the first time they had heard words of praise, and it strengthened their confidence. Yet life on the ranch was not just about chores. The women still faced subtle challenges. When John was away into town to fetch supplies, neighbors would sometimes glance suspiciously at the women, muttering under their breath. Not everyone welcomed newcomers, especially women from outside their community. Aylin, Taya, and Naya could feel it, and it reminded them that the world beyond the cabin was not always kind. John, sensing their unease, reassured them each evening. "Don't worry about what others think," he said. "Here you are safe and you are valued." His words offered comfort, but John knew there would be times when they would need to face prejudice with courage and patience. Another challenge came from the natural dangers surrounding the ranch. One afternoon, a rattlesnake appeared near the chicken coop. The sharp sound of its rattle sent a chill through the women. Taya froze, unsure of what to do, while Aylin instinctively stepped back. John moved quickly, grabbing a long stick and guiding the snake away from the coop and toward the woods. Once the danger had passed, he explained calmly, "Snakes are part of this land. If you stay alert and careful, they won't harm you. Respect them, and they'll respect you." The women nodded, absorbing every word. As the weeks passed, the women grew stronger, more capable, and more confident. Aylin learned to care for small injuries, using some of the herbal remedies she had known from her family. Naya became skilled at identifying safe plants for food and medicine, while Taya developed a talent for working with the animals. John watched with amazement as their confidence grew. What had once seemed impossible, caring for livestock, repairing fences, navigating the land, became part of their daily routine. But even with these successes, life demanded more. One afternoon, John spotted smoke rising in the distance. He realized that a small fire had started in the dry grasslands nearby, and if left unchecked, it could threaten the ranch. John immediately organized a plan. "Aylin, Taya, Naya, grab water and blankets," he called. Together they formed a line, dousing the flames and beating down the smaller sparks before the fire could spread. It was exhausting work, and their arms ached by the end, but they succeeded in stopping the fire. As they rested afterward, John looked at the women with admiration. "You did amazing," he said. "I couldn't have done it alone." The fire incident marked a turning point. The women realized that they could face danger and survive, not just by fleeing, but by working together and trusting their abilities. They were no longer helpless travelers in an unfamiliar land. They were part of a team, capable of protecting themselves and contributing to life on the ranch. John, in turn, felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect for their courage. During the quiet evenings, they would sit together by the fire, talking softly about their day, sharing stories, or planning for the next tasks. The bonds of friendship deepened, and laughter became a part of life again. The women began to feel a sense of belonging, something they had not experienced since leaving their village. John, too, discovered a new sense of purpose, realizing that his life was richer because he was not alone. Yet the challenges were far from over. One morning, a sudden storm struck. The wind howled and rain poured down in heavy sheets. The river swelled quickly, threatening to flood parts of the ranch. Guiza softened bad and boasted. John and the women scrambled to secure everything, moving animals to higher ground, tying down equipment, and patching leaks in the cabin. The storm lasted for hours, testing their endurance and resolve. But by working together, they managed to protect the animals and keep the cabin safe. Exhausted, they collapsed near the fire afterward, wet and tired, but relieved. In those moments of shared struggle, trust and respect deepened even further. John realized that life on the frontier was not just about survival, but about facing challenges together, learning from each other, and relying on shared skills and courage. Aylin, Taya, and Naya had transformed from wary travelers into capable, resourceful companions. They had grown stronger, braver, and more confident than John had ever imagined. By the end of the season, the women were fully integrated into ranch life. They had learned to care for animals, repair fences, navigate the wilderness, and handle emergencies. John had learned from them as well, appreciating the knowledge of plants, natural remedies, and survival skills they brought from their heritage. Together they had created a life that was resilient, cooperative, and meaningful, a life that was richer than anything John had known alone. And yet, there was a quiet understanding that life on the ranch would continue to test them. The wilderness was unforgiving, and challenges would always arise. But John and the women faced the future with courage and determination, ready to meet whatever came next. They had learned that by working together, trusting one another, and respecting the land and its dangers, they could overcome obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. Through the struggles, triumphs, and daily routines, a family had begun to form, not by blood, but by shared experiences, trust, and compassion. John realized that rescuing the women from the riverbank months earlier had changed everything. The ranch was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It was a home filled with hope, courage, and new beginnings. The hardships had brought them together, and together they were stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the frontier had in store. The months had passed quickly on John's ranch. The seasons had changed, bringing hot summer days and cool, crisp evenings. The women, Island, Taya, and Naya, had grown strong, confident, and skilled in the ways of the land. They no longer moved cautiously or hesitated at every sound. They worked alongside John, their laughter and voices now a familiar part of life on the ranch. What had begun as a chance meeting by the riverbank had transformed into something deeper, a family built not by blood, but by shared experiences, trust, and care. John often reflected on how much his life had changed. He had spent years alone, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and moving quietly through the quiet expanse of the frontier. The ranch had been his world, but it had been a lonely one. Now, as he watched the women work together to mend a section of fence, their hands moving efficiently, their voices teasing each other lightly, he realized that his life was no longer just about survival or routine. It was about connection, responsibility, and the joy of seeing others thrive. One morning, John noticed Aylin walking near the river, looking out over the water with a thoughtful expression. He approached her quietly, not wanting to startle her. "You seem lost in thought," he said gently. Aylin smiled faintly. "I was thinking about home," she said. "About my family, my village. I hope they are safe." John nodded, understanding the longing in her eyes. "I know," he said. "We will do what we can to find them, but until then, you have a home here." Aylin's smile grew a little wider, the weight of uncertainty lightened by the knowledge that she was not alone. Life continued to bring small joys and accomplishments. The women had learned to manage the garden, caring for vegetables and herbs that provided both nourishment and healing. They had grown proficient at caring for the animals, feeding the chickens, milking the cows, and helping with the horses. Each day brought a new challenge, but also a new opportunity to grow and learn. John noticed how much he had learned from them as well. Their knowledge of plants, natural remedies, and survival skills had improved the ranch and made life easier. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been apart. One evening, after a long day of work, they gathered around the fire outside the cabin. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, orange and pink blending into deep purple. They shared a simple meal of bread, vegetables, and milk, laughing and talking quietly. The warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth in their hearts. John realized that these moments, the simple pleasures of companionship and shared labor, were as valuable as any success on the ranch. He had found a new meaning in life, a sense of purpose that went beyond work or routine. The bond between them grew stronger as time went on. Aylin, Taya, and Naya began to express themselves more openly. They shared stories of their childhoods, the games they had played, and the lessons they had learned from their families. John listened carefully, fascinated by their experiences and proud of the resilience they had shown. In return, he shared stories of his parents and the early days of the ranch, tales of hardship, perseverance, and quiet triumphs. Through these stories, they built trust and understanding, learning from one another and finding common ground despite their different backgrounds. The women also began to form relationships with the land itself. They learned to read the weather, recognize animal tracks, and understand the rhythms of the river and fields. John watched with pride as they became not just visitors, but true caretakers of the ranch. Their knowledge of the wilderness, combined with John's experience, created a team capable of facing the challenges of frontier life with confidence and skill. One day, John received word from a nearby town that a traveling trader had seen a group of Apache families in a safe area not far from the ranch. Island's eyes brightened at the news, though a shadow of worry remained. "I want to see my family again," she said softly. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll make sure you can," he said. "But until then, this is your home. You are safe here and you belong here." Island nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and security. She realized that she had found a family in John and the others, and that the bond they shared was strong and unbreakable. As the seasons continued to change, the women fully integrated into ranch life. Taya and Naya became skilled at managing the animals, repairing fences, and navigating the wilderness. Island, once weak and hesitant, had become a confident and capable woman, able to help with the garden, prepare meals, and care for the animals. John marveled at their growth, realizing that their presence had not only improved the ranch, but it also enriched his own life in ways he could never have imagined. The community began to take notice as well. Neighbors who had once been wary of the women now saw them as hardworking, skilled, and trustworthy. The initial prejudice faded, replaced by respect for their abilities and their courage. John felt proud not just of his own efforts, but of the way the women had adapted, persevered, and earned their place in the wider community. They had not only survived, but they had thrived, proving their strength and resilience to everyone around them. Evenings at the ranch became times of reflection and gratitude. John often sat with the women near the fire, sharing stories, discussing plans for the future, or simply enjoying the quiet beauty of the desert. They laughed together, sometimes teasing each other gently, other times sharing moments of quiet thoughtfulness. In these moments, John felt a profound sense of connection, a feeling that life, though unpredictable and sometimes harsh, was richer when shared with others. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned deep blue, "You saved us," she said softly, "but you also changed us." "And we changed you, didn't we?" John smiled, feeling the truth in her words. "Yes," he admitted, "you've all brought life, courage, and joy into this place. I never imagined I could feel so connected, so responsible, and so proud." Island nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the depth of their shared journey. By the time winter approached, the ranch had become a true home. The cabin was warm and welcoming, the animals healthy and safe, and the women fully part of John's life. Together, they had faced storms, wild animals, and the challenges of frontier living. They had learned to trust one another, to work together, and to find joy in the small victories. John realized that rescuing the women from the riverbank had been only the beginning. Their presence had transformed his life, filling it with purpose, connection, and love. The first snowfall of the season brought a quiet magic to the ranch. The land was covered in a soft blanket of white, and the air was crisp and clean. John, Aylin, Taya, and Naya walked through the snow together, leaving footprints that marked their journey. They laughed as they tossed snow at one another, their voices echoing in the stillness. John felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that they had found a family in each other, and that the bond they shared would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the fire crackled that evening and the women settled into their blankets, John realized something profound. Life on the frontier had taught him resilience, patience, and hard work, but it had been the chance encounter at the riverbank that had truly changed him. The women had brought laughter, love, and purpose into his life. They had taught him the importance of trust, courage, and compassion. And together they had built something lasting, a family, a home, and a life full of hope. John knew that the riverbank where he had first found them would always hold a special place in his heart. It was a reminder of how a single act of kindness, courage, and openness could change the course of many lives. The women, once strangers fleeing danger, were now his family, his companions, and his teachers in ways he had never expected. They had all changed each other, and in that change they had found strength, joy, and a sense of belonging that could never be taken away. As the night settled over the ranch, John looked around at the women, now sleeping peacefully by the fire, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had brought them together in the most unexpected way, and together they had created something extraordinary. The frontier was still vast, wild, and sometimes dangerous, but they were ready to face it together. Their journey had begun at a riverbank, but it had led to something far greater. A life transformed, a family forged, and a future full of promise.